Howdy my totally tubular edgy gamers, and we are back for another ranking video. And today's ranking video is going to be on a pretty iconic game character. We're going to be ranking all of the Duke Nukem games. Yep, Duke Nukem, the badass alien killer who gets all the babes, kicks all the ass, and chews all the bubblegum. Now, Duke Nukem has become pretty iconic with first-person shooters because of his landmark shooter Duke Nukem 3D. However, Duke Nukem actually has a ton of other games that aren't 3D and Duke Nukem Forever, and so I thought, let's rank all the Duke Nukem games. Originally starting as a pretty tame side-scroller by Apogee Software, for Duke's third game, 3D Realms would take the helm and they transformed Duke into what he is known as today. The roid-munching, beer-drinking, lady killer badass who could kill anything that could move and has so many iconic one-liners that you could fill a book. He's pretty legendary amongst video games these days. And naturally, he became pretty popular like right out of the gate. I mean, how could someone like Duke not become popular? And naturally, with such a popular character and a popular game, there have been tons of other Duke Nukem games over the years. And these games have been of varying quality, with some being absolute gold and some of them being so bad you want to flush them down the toilet. And some of them, well, they just took forever to come out. Lame ass jokes aside, we're really going to be ranking all of Duke's games, not just the main games. We're going to be looking at the main games, the spin-offs, and a few handheld titles as well. No obscure phone games though. I don't even know how I'm supposed to play these nowadays. They're just not going to be here. And I'm only going to be including one version of each game. If I included every version of every Duke game, we'd have 10 Duke Nukem 3Ds on here at least. And I don't think anybody wants to see that. We will be ranking these games mostly on quality, as that seems to be the best metric to rank things on. So, quality it is. When it comes to my history with Duke, played Duke Nukem 3D many years ago, played Forever when it came out, and went back and played all the other Duke games. And when I was a teenager, I was pretty into Duke Nukem, thought he was like the shit, thought he was hella cool, and all that good stuff. Anyway, let's just get down to ranking all of these games. Let me know what your favorite Duke game is in the comments. Like, share, sub, all that great stuff. What do I think is the worst of the Duke Nukem games? What's just the absolute trash bin of Duke Nukem? At the bottom of the barrel, we have Duke Nukem Critical Mass for the Nintendo DS, released in 2011. I don't even think most people know that this game exists, and the less said about it, the better, but I'll very briefly explain it. The game is a 2.5D platformer along the lines of Manhattan Project, only it's really bad. Like, really bad. The game has just awful controls. Like, these controls are just terrible, especially when the game is pseudo 3D and when you're fighting these bosses. Like, it's not good at all. It's very poor. The level design is also very poor. The presentation, even for the DS, is terrible. And this is just all around one of the worst platformers I've ever had the displeasure of playing. I can confidently say every game on this list is better than this game. Do not ever think about this game again. Please let this game empty out of your head. It's that bad. Our next game is Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, released for the PlayStation in 2000. This game is the follow-up to Duke Nukem Time to Kill. It's a third-person shooter with very similar graphics and gameplay. The game's plot sees Duke traveling to the future, where he meets up with this woman named Jane who explains to him that aliens have exterminated all men on Earth and the women are captured to be used as slaves, and it sees Duke fighting Silverback, a silverback gorilla. The plot is pretty damn goofy, and the ending is about as stupid as it gets, where Duke has to repopulate Earth by himself. The story is pretty whatever, and gameplay-wise, yeah, this isn't all that great, and it's aged pretty terribly. It is a very mediocre third-person shooter that just does not have a lot going for it. The shooting itself is pretty whatever. The controls are just not good. They're very unresponsive. Jumping is just not good. Sometimes it's delayed if it even happens at all. Precise aiming is very difficult. Interestingly enough, this was the first game to get rid of the health bar in the Duke series and instead of the ego meter, which is in Forever and Manhattan Project. A lot of these levels just straight suck. The level design is ass, and any underwater level can just eat shit and die. But I absolutely cannot recommend this game to anybody. Like, Land of the Babes? What the hell? Like, it's like an awful Tomb Raider. Like the OG Tomb Raiders. No, just do not play. Our next game is Duke Nukem Advance, released for the GBA in 2002. Now, I originally thought that this was just a 3D port like Doom on Game Boy Advance. However, this is actually an original game. It does have many of the assets and sounds of Duke Nukem 3D, but it does have an original storyline and levels. The game sees Duke working for the EDF as he goes to investigate Area 51, where he finds the aliens trying to wake up their brethren from hibernation in Egypt. Then Duke goes to Australia and a couple other places. And in terms of the gameplay, it is pretty similar to Duke 3D. Obviously, it has very flat, basic levels. I mean, it is a Game Boy Advance game, and the controls aren't all that good, but I mean, it's a Game Boy Advance game. I'm sure for the time that this was very impressive. The game even reviewed well back in the day. However, when you're comparing all the Duke Nukem games and ranking them from worst to best, this is going to be near the bottom for obvious reasons. It's not very long, and I don't really have much to say about it. I mean, it is a fine enough first-person shooter for the Game Boy Advance, because for some reason there are FPS games on the Game Boy Advance. Hey, at least it's better than Serious Sam Advance. Our next game is Duke Nukem Time to Kill, released on the PlayStation in 1998. And this is similar to Land of the Babes, but it's a little bit better. The game involves Duke time traveling to a couple different time periods to stop the aliens from just ruining everything, and Duke even changes outfits with the time period, which is a nice touch. The general gameplay and controls of this game are very similar to the original couple Tomb Raiders, and even though this game is obviously not as good as the original couple Tomb Raiders, it still has not aged all that gracefully. The shooting isn't awful, being precise is pretty difficult, and the platforming is, well, it's just not very good. It's quite unresponsive, and a lot of the time you need to be like frame perfect, which is just way too much to ask in a game like this. But at least the level design isn't totally terrible. I mean, it's totally not tubular either, but hey, it's fine enough. I mean, it gets the job done. It's not confusing, and it usually just involves Duke collecting some items. And, you know, the game does have its bright moments when you're just gunning people down with a big Gatling gun. I mean, there's that. And Duke himself is generally pretty funny. He's got some good quotes here that weren't in 3D, and some of them, there's some good stuff here. There's also a lot of nice little Easter eggs as well. However, I still would not recommend this game. If you were looking to play something of this style, I would say just stick to the original Tomb Raiders. This game might have a couple positives to it, but it's just weighed down by how clunky it is and all of its other negatives, to the point where I'm like, there's really just no point in even playing this. Our next game is actually the original Duke Nukem. Yes, Duke Nukem One, released by Apogee Software in 1991. Now, the original Duke Nukem is a pretty basic 2D platformer. I mean, you move around these usually basic levels looking for keys to just kind of progress to the next level where you do the same thing. And you shoot a bunch of robots with your basic pistol. You can upgrade the pistol a couple times and you fight a different number of enemies, but again, it is really quite simplistic. The plot is about Duke trying to stop Dr. Proton from taking over the world with his robots. The game really is about as basic as it looks. I mean, there's just not all that much to it. It's a very competent, fine enough 2D platformer. It's not perfect, and the game does have some really annoying levels, such as the maze-like levels, but I mean, it's fine enough. It was the first one. But I'm not going to come out here and say like it was a great 2D platformer, even for the time. I think it was very average at best, really, even for the time. I mean, Mario Brothers like 3 and World were out, and those are just infinitely better platformers than this. I mean, the game can have its fun moments, but for the most part, unless you grew up playing this game or you played it back in the day, I don't really think there's any reason anybody should even go back to it. I mean, there's just not all that much to it. But hey, it's better than that crap we got on the DS. Our next game is Duke Nukem 0 Hour, developed by Eurocom, released in 1999 for the N64. 0 Hour isn't all that different from Time to Kill, but it is quite a bit better. The story is basically almost the same. It sees Duke going through different time periods to stop the aliens, only this time he's trying to rescue his ancestors. And when it comes to the gameplay and general controls, it is quite similar to Time to Kill. It's still pretty imprecise with the shooting, and the platforming can be a bit iffy. However, 0 Hour makes up for this because there's just less platforming. There's much less platforming, it is a bit more responsive, and the game plays much more like a third-person shooter rather than an action-adventure kind of game. And you know, this game has something that I didn't have with Time to Kill. I actually had fun with 0 Hour. There's actually some fun to be had here. Duke's great, some lines are great. The game does have a fair amount of charm. There are some funny moments to it, and just running around gunning down pig cops with all the weapons and going through the different time periods. There's actually really there's some fun to be had here, which is kind of surprising. And yeah, the frame rate isn't exactly the best and the presentation can be questionable at times, but really, I just expected all these 3D Duke games to be just garbage, but this is the only one where I'm like, hey, you know, this isn't actually that bad, and I mean, if you're a really big Duke fan, maybe you should give this a try. There might be something here. Sure, it is pretty clunky still, but there might be something here. Our next game is a very infamous game. It is Duke Nukem Forever, released in 2011 by multiple development teams. I think it is pretty crazy that Duke Nukem Forever is a decade old now, and I think it's still pretty crazy that the game actually did come out after 15 years of development hell. And yes, I know a lot of people were very disappointed with the end product, but I think, especially all these years later, it's easier to look back on the game and go, you know, it wasn't actually that bad. It was not great, and it was a pretty mixed bag, but it wasn't this piece of crap that people were selling it as. I mean, sure, you do play with crap in the game, but it wasn't that bad. The game absolutely does have its flaws and does not fit in 2011 society, let alone today's society. This game just does not belong at all. Duke really doesn't belong in today's society either, but I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there is a little bit of fun to be had here. The game takes place like a dozen years after Duke 3D and sees the aliens coming back, and Duke pretty much just ripping a new one on the aliens. And the story was pretty damn stupid, but you know, Duke has never had the best plot lines in his games, but I mean, this one might be reaching a new low for the main series. It was pretty stupid. And when it comes to Duke himself, it was very hit and miss. I mean, he does have a few lines that I think are actually relatively funny, but most of them are a pretty big miss and just don't really align with anyone nowadays. I mean, Duke himself feels like a bit of a relic, just kind of stuck in the past, and some of the main characters even make fun of Duke that he's stuck in the past in this game. It's just kind of all over the place, and really that's the best way to describe the gameplay of Duke Nukem Forever also, is it really is just all over the place. While most of it is a first-person shooter, the game does throw in all this other stuff, like when you're driving a monster truck, or when you're shrunk down, or when you're just interacting with the world and doing these mini-games. Like, it really is all over the place. It feels like it took a long time to make and a lot of different people made it, because there's just so many almost random ideas thrown in here, and the game is never consistent with anything. Like, the only thing it's consistent at is being inconsistent with its gameplay. I mean, sure, there's a lot of variety when it comes to the gameplay, but it's just to a point now that it just feels unfocused. Now, when it comes to the actual shooting, when you're just shooting pig cops and aliens and just killing everything, it's actually pretty okay. The game does use the ego meter, it's regenerating health basically, and it has a lot of iconic weapons from Duke's arsenal. Why you can only carry a couple weapons instead of all of them, I just don't really like that, but you know, when you're just actually shooting the enemies and killing them and getting in firefights, it's fine enough. Hell, I might even say there's actually some enjoyment here. The problem is when all this other crap comes in, like these turret sections, when you're tiny and doing platforming, when you're underwater, when you're driving, like all of this just does not need to be in the game. It doesn't add anything, it's not good most of the time. It feels very underdeveloped, especially the mini games. And it's like, it's cool, they're throwing back to Duke 3D with the interactivity, but it's just not good in this game most of the time. It's really not. I will say though, increasing your ego meter by interacting with the world was a nice touch. The game obviously has a lot of ups and downs, but I mean, at least we got the game, right? I mean, it could have been worse. It certainly could have been worse. And I'll give a special little shout out to the DLC, The Doctor Who Cloned Me. I thought this was probably better than the actual game. It was a lot more focused and just focused on the shooting and it being a first-person shooter first and foremost, and it actually had some funny bits to it, and I thought it was pretty decent. I think a lot of people overreacted to Forever when it came out. I mean, with such a long development cycle and so much hype behind it. I mean, it wasn't great. It wasn't even all that good, but it wasn't that bad either. It was pretty average to middling, and for people calling it like the worst game of that year of 2011, I really disagree with that one. I think you should have tried some of the other lesser games of 2011 and then come back to this. I think this is better than all those early 3D Duke games on PS1 and 64, but that's just me. Everybody and their mom already knows about this game, and everyone's probably got their mind made up about it, so I'm not here to change anyone's mind. This is just what I think about the game, and you can get it pretty cheap, so do what you want. Our next game is Duke Nukem 2, released for DOS in 1993. Now, Duke Nukem 2 really looks at the original Duke Nukem game and just is like, how do we make this a much better game? The game takes place after the original and sees Duke chilling when he's captured by these aliens known as the Regulartans. And yeah, they're trying to take over Earth. Duke busts out, starts kicking ass. That's really the whole game's plot. And this is actually quite a good side scroll. The levels are a lot more in depth. There's a lot more to them. They're much better in design. They're less maze-like. There's a lot more interactivity and a lot more going on in these levels. Like, look at the first level. There's just a bunch of explosions and you're just killing everything. The shooting feels a lot better. Gunning down these aliens feels great. There's a lot more weapons here. I think there's 4 as opposed to the 1 in the original game. There's actually some vehicles here, which is great. There's just a lot more to these levels. The game looks and sounds a hell of a lot better. There's a lot more animation, charm, and personality. There's a bit of an attitude here too, which I can appreciate. The game has significantly more to the game. Like, there's just more going on. It's more engaging. There's power-ups that make it a lot more fun. Like, the game is actually quite a good 2D platformer. I'd say it's probably Apogee's best platformer of them all, and they made some classic ones back in the day. Like, it really is like their best platformer, and I know that nowadays this game is pretty ignored when it comes to its sequel, Duke 3D, but I think Duke Nukem 2 is nothing to sleep on. It is quite a good platformer. Sure, it is only on like DOS still, basically, but I think it is still an enjoyable game that should not be missed by anybody who likes the genre or Duke Nukem. Now our next game, and what I believe to be the second best Duke game of them all, is Duke Nukem Manhattan Project, originally released on the computer in 2002. Now Manhattan Project was actually pretty different from Duke 3D and those other 3D Duke games that came out a little before this, and it was more along the lines of Duke Nukem 2 actually. It's a 2.5D platformer that takes the attitude and level exploring from 3D, and it's able to make a pretty enjoyable time. The levels aren't just straight left to right where you kill everything that moves. I mean, you're still killing a lot of things that move, yes, but there are some areas where you do interact with the environment. There are some basic puzzles to solve, and there actually is some exploration. You go up and down and into tunnels, up ladders. Like, there's actually some real exploration here. Again, it's a 2.5D platformer. To get through these levels, you want to save the babes. They've got bombs strapped to their chest, and Duke's got to take them off. Along the way, you get some pretty cool weapons, some classic Duke weapons, and some new ones here, and you kill a bunch of classic Duke enemies, and a few new ones here also. And you know, the shooting, it's actually pretty enjoyable, and this is a very enjoyable 2D platformer. The plot sees Duke Nukem taking on new antagonist Mech Morphix, a mad scientist who's trying to take over Manhattan, so New York, and sees Duke fighting everything in New York, and he's really duking it out. Now, Duke himself, he's actually pretty good here. He's got some good quotes, he's got some funny lines, some funny dialogue. He's pretty alright here. He doesn't have too much stuff that's just like, oh, yikes, you can't be saying that nowadays. But, I mean, there's some good stuff here. Something that the other 2D Duke games don't have is this game is actually pretty hard. There's a lot of challenging parts to it, not just in the levels, how you have to explore every nook and cranny to find all the babes and all the collectibles, but the game actually will challenge you quite a bit. It definitely has some challenging moments to it, which is appreciated. It keeps it engaging. This game as a whole, I think, is actually pretty underrated nowadays. I mean, I don't really hear anybody ever talk about Manhattan Project, even when talking about Duke Nukem. You also got to remember it's a 2002 budget game. I mean, obviously there's going to be certain limitations, and other big budget 2002 platformers probably were a bit better, but I like the game for what it was. It's one of my favorite Duke titles. I've always had a nice time with it, and it's a memorable experience, and I think that if you're a fan of Duke, you really have no reason to not check this out. It's dirt cheap, and it is even on 360, but that version seems to be a little bit more questionable. But I genuinely have no problem recommending the game. And you already knew that the best Duke game of them all has to be Duke Nukem 3D. It's really what put Duke on the map, and it's what put his entire series on the map. Duke Nukem 3D is just one of the greatest first-person shooters ever created, and is a landmark title for a variety of reasons. The premise was pretty simple. Those alien bastards shot up Duke's ride. It's time for him to take them all out and save all the babes. Most of the game was in contemporary locations such as Los Angeles, and then there were some less contemporary ones like space. But Duke's world and setting was a lot more detailed than what gamers were used to at the time for first-person shooters. I mean, most of the time it was stuff like Hell or the Mars or like a Nazi castle. Like, this was actually really cool how detailed it all was, and it added to the mystique and world of Duke Nukem. Then there was Duke himself, who was an actual character, while Doom Guy and BJ they didn't even speak. Duke, he talks all the time. He's got tons of great one-liners, he's funny, he's charismatic, he's a ladies' man, that's for sure. He certainly oozes that Chad energy, and that just was not really seen in any game, let alone a first-person shooter. Usually they wanted it to be you, the player. No, you played as Duke. Duke was a badass, and he was great. He'd rescue women and kill basically everything that was not dead and eating shit, and he would do that with his great arsenal. Duke 3D has a really nice weapon arsenal to it, with some really unique ones. Some of those really unique ones, like the freeze thrower and the shrink ray, like, that's all fun stuff, along with the usual staples you'd find in a first-person shooter. And the combat was really satisfying in this game, and the enemies were also really interesting. They all had their own unique patterns. They were all really original. There was different ways to take them out. It's really fun to just go around killing everything in this game. I mean, that's what it was. It was satisfying. Everything was meaty. When you'd blow enemies up, you blow their ass up. It was gory. Duke would say something cool. Like, it's really badass. The game has aged incredibly well, especially with all these throwback shooters now. Like, this game is better than like all those throwback shooters. This is the best of the throwback shooters, arguably. It is a fantastic game all around, through and through, with excellent level design, interactivity, weapons, enemies, Duke himself. Like, there's really almost nothing you can fault this game with. I mean, of course you can go after some of the game's questionable morals, like how Duke is to the ladies, how he treats them, all that stuff. I mean, of course there's that, but when I'm talking about just the raw gameplay experience, it's fantastic. It is a great time, and I've never not had a great time with it. The game is considered one of the all-time greats, and it's up there as one of my favorite first-person shooters and games of all time. I just really love Duke 3D, and then there are so many versions. There's endless versions of Duke 3D. Like, we're talking every console. We're talking N64, PS1, I think like even Sega Genesis. We got Game.com. We got, of course, the computer, Xbox 360, PS3, Xbox One, PS4, Nintendo Switch, iPhone. We got endless versions of Duke 3D. You can play Duke 3D anyway these days. There's even multiplayer that is in some of these newer versions. There's, of course, all the expansions to Duke 3D that are all great. My favorite being Life's a Beach. I love all the expansions to an extent, but Life's a Beach is the best one. There's even some of the source ports that get 3D models in there. Like, Duke 3D is just a legendary video game featuring a legendary character. And if Duke's ever going to be remembered for anything, it's going to be Duke Nukem 3D, or the long development cycle of forever. But hopefully it's just Duke Nukem 3D, which is just a fantastic game overall, with some of the best shooting you'll find in a video game. And really, I could just sit here and get on my knees and suck the game's dick all day, because I just love Duke Nukem 3D. It's a fantastic game. And I think that anybody who likes first-person shooters is really going to like Duke Nukem 3D. And again, some of it is morally questionable. I don't condone anything Duke says or what he does in this game. It's not okay, and Duke definitely can feel like a relic in that aspect, but this game is a classic, and you just gotta look at it as that. It was a game in the 90s that was doing its own thing, obviously for a very male-oriented, probably teenage to early adult demographic, and that was all there was to it. Game's still pretty fun, though, all these years later, I won't lie. I mean, I have no problem always coming back to Duke. I mean, the music is great, and if I haven't said it by now, the Duke Nukem theme is just majestic. It's so good. It's beautiful. I love the Duke theme. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope everyone enjoyed. Let me know your favorite Duke game in the comments. If you made it to this part of the video, let's get bricks in the comments. That's the key word, the code word between us. Anyway, hope everyone has a great Christmas, New Year's, 4th of July, whatever the closest holiday is. See ya later. Bye-bye.